Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we're live here. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us today for Food Systems in Season. We have a whole new set of classes with different experts in different areas of food systems and how to produce more food at home for yourself and for your families. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida Extension in Hernando County. And joining me today is my co-host, Wendy Wood, who is with University of Florida Extension over on the other side of Florida in St. Johns County. Good morning, Wendy. How are you?
Good morning, Bill. Great to be here. Excited for another season.
Yes, we were planning on being here last week also, but the hurricane kind of interrupted that one and we had to cancel it. We are
Right.
hoping to have those guests on in just a few weeks. We're kind of making arrangements, having to juggle the schedule around. But today we're going to be talking. We got Dr. Norma Samuel, our boss. She is the University of Florida Central District Director. Good morning, Norma. How you doing?
Good morning. So, unfortunately, not too good. I'm sick, but I'm happy to be on with your viewers this morning. So, thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and start showing a video in just a moment here. And we also are supposed to have Jeremy Rhoden, who is with University of Florida Extension in Marion County up in Ocala with us also. He's having technical difficulties, so he will probably be popping in just a few minutes here. So, want to go ahead and start with the video? Wendy, we good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, give me just a second here, and let me go ahead and open this up.
Hi, welcome to Let's Talk Gardening. I'm Norma Samuel with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sumter County. Today we're going to talk about sorrel hibiscus sabderifa. It's a relative of okra, cotton, and hibiscus. It is native to West and Central Africa, and it's a crop that's popularly grown in the Caribbean. And I grew up, using a lot of sorrel. It was grown many years ago, quite a bit in Florida, and production subsided. But sorrel is making a comeback because of the versatility of the plant. You can use pretty much all parts of the plant. The seed can be used as an alternative to coffee. You can also use the leaves as spinach, or you can use them in salads. But the part of the plant that we treasure most is the calyces of the flower. You can make jams, wines, jellies, and sorrel drink, as we call it. So, sorrel is also referred to as roselle. Some people may know it as roselle. It's also referred to as Jamaican sorrel. So, there are lots of different common names. So, I'll tell you a little more about the sorrel plant. So, let's get a close up. Sorrel plants are a wonderful addition to the home landscape, and you can see that the leaves are deeply lobed and they have these beautiful red stems, and they get to about 4 to 5 feet tall. So when you're adding them to your landscape, you want to plant them around 4 to 5 feet apart. These we've planted in the ground since around late March. So they've been here for a while, and we've been lucky that we got a first early harvest. And so it was a small one, but what we do each year is that we save the seeds from that early harvest. So that way we're kind of selecting for the plants that will, produce early. The problem that we've had with our sorrel plants the last few years is that they were being eaten by rabbits. So every time we put a few plants out, the rabbits would get them. So we came up with a strategy this year to kind of get around the rabbits so the plants can mature. So we use these plastic flower pots, and we cut a hole in the bottom, so you can see the hole there, and then we planted the seeds, or you can put your seedlings in there. And there's some stakes that we have here that we nailed down in the, the portion of the bottom of the pot that remains to keep it sturdy. So it's very sturdy. And that was how we've been able to get our plants to grow this year, because the rabbits have been terrible. In terms of fertilization, you make your first fertilizer application about a month after planting, and then you can fertilize about every 4 weeks. Usually we fertilize about twice, and that's it. And we fertilize with 10-10-10. So same fertilizer as you would use for your vegetable garden. Sorrel plants are a beautiful addition to the landscape because of the flower. And unfortunately, I don't have any blooms on these right now, but the flower is similar to that of okra and cotton. As I said before, they're all in the same family. But the flower of the sorrel has a pinkish hue to it. So it's the yellow with the pinkish hue, and then the center of it has a red, a deep red. So after the petals fall off, you have the calyces of the flower remaining, and this is the treasured part of the plant for me. So after the petals fall off, it will take about 3 weeks before you can harvest these. So what I'll do, I'll just take a scissors or a knife and I'll clip that off. And the more you harvest your sorrel, the more produce you will get, or the more sorrel you will get. There's a sorrel waiting here to come out in the axil. So once I remove this one, then it will allow that other one to develop. So that one will not develop fully develop until I take this one off. So there are several ways that you can go about taking the calyces off. So you can simply use your hand and strip these off. However, there's a tool that we recently found online. We saw it online, and then we were able to. This is the tool that we use to strip the sorrel, as we call it. So removing the calyces from the seed bowl. And it's pretty much, you could say, like an umbrella handle. And we were able to source this from someone locally. And you can see there, the end is kind of like an umbrella handle. And we got that for $5. And the edge here is a bit sharp. So we just use that to strip it. So let me demonstrate that. This is the bowl, and I'll just push this under there, and you push that up, and simple as that, you have your sorrel stripped. And you can see the hole right there. You can either freeze these. So I usually rinse and freeze these, or you can put them to dry. So it's whatever your preference is. But I prefer them, frozen. It maintains the fresh flavor, I find, when it's frozen. But some people prefer dry. The benefit of drying it is that it utilizes less storage space. But I prefer it frozen. I'm sure you're curious and want to find out, well, just how many plants do I need to put in the ground? And I would say if you have a small family, you can put in 1 or 2 plants, and you probably don't want to plant as much as I do, unless you have, space to freeze them, or you have space to dry and then store them. Last year, we had a plant that came up in my flower bed, and that's what we would call a volunteer plant. So it's not a weed, it would be a volunteer plant. And I decided not to move it. And it really liked the location. And that one plant, we were able to get about 5.5 5-gallon buckets of sorrel just from that one plant. It was the most prolific sorrel plant we've ever had. We got so many bowls or from that. It was just amazing. So of course the seeds that we saved last year were from that one plant, because it not only flowered early, but it was very productive. So those are some of the qualities that you should look for when you're saving seeds from your plants. The desirable characteristics that you're looking for. So if you find a plant that you're growing and it has characteristics that you like, certainly save the seeds from that plant. Landscape, we usually plant the sorrel as a hedge. And when this, matures, it is absolutely beautiful. So you see this row of plants with the red stems, and then you see the blooms. And if you have an area like this with full sun, because sorrel requires full sun, I would highly recommend you put in a hedge like this. Nothing better than having an edible hedge. The only disadvantage would be that you would have to replant it every year, but it comes to about 5 to 7 feet, depending on how well you're taking care of it in a very short time. So the only problem that we've had with regards to disease is fusarium wilt. Another problem that you may come across is root knot nematodes, and we've spoken about root knot nematodes in a few episodes before, but that's not a problem that we've encountered here in our landscape. So this particular one is suffering from fusarium wilt, and we do not apply any treatment. And how do you know it's fusarium wilt? Well, if you're watering and you notice that, the plant isn't perking back up after you've given it adequate amount of water, then there's something else going on. So the first time we noticed this, we submitted a sample to the plant disease clinic, and that was the diagnosis that we got. So after the first few years, what we started to do was rotating the planting holes. So you can rotate, either within the row, or you can rotate between the rows. So that way you're shifting the location of the planting holes each time. So we're not spraying for the disease, but rather we're using a cultural approach to containing the disease. Another pest problem we commonly see on sorrel here in Florida is mealybugs. And these are insects that suck the juices from the young growth on the young portion of the plant. So you can see I have one here. So I would just use my finger and squish it. Sometimes if I'm out here and I'm watering, I would just, use the hose and use a, good stream of water to knock them off of the plant. So they're very easy to get rid of. If you are not paying attention and you end up with a high population of mealybugs, then what you can do is use horticultural oil. Now, remember, you cannot use horticultural oil when the temperatures are high, but just constantly monitor your plants when you come out the young tips, and you'll be able to get ahead of these mealybugs when they do try to attack your plant. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Let's Talk Gardening. I hope I inspired you to go out and get some sorrel plants in the ground. If you don't have any seeds, find a friend or neighbor who could share some with you and get those plants in the ground. And by October, November, you'll be harvesting sorrel. I'm Norma Samuel with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Sumter County. Thank you very much. Okra, cotton, and hibiscus.
Okay, let me pop everybody back on here. And Jeremy was able to fix his technical difficulty and come in and join us. So Jeremy, I think you're on mute and Wendy's on mute. So Norma, that was great. I've never grown sorrel before, and I don't think I've tried it in tea or anything else yet. Although I've seen it growing, it is a very, very pretty plant. It has really pretty flowers.
You're really missing out, Bill. So since I've been here in the US and being exposed to other cultures using sorrel, I've also had the opportunity to try it in salads. So you can use the young tender leaves in your salad. It gives it a tart flavor to it. So if you like that taste, that works for you. And I've also had it sauteed. We conducted some research, myself and Matt Smith, who is now in Lake County. He was in Sumter with me at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was a sustainable agriculture and research education on farm grant that we got to do the research. And we looked at 4 different sorrel varieties for production in Florida. And one of the farmers that we worked with, she was so excited about growing sorrel because during the summer, there are not many greens that she could grow. So she would just snip the leaves off, bag them up, and take them to her farm stand and sell them as greens. And they're pretty tasty. Yeah. You could also make wines, jams, jellies. I've also made chutney and also made pies with it. Wow. And you can also, with your apple pies, chop up some of the calyces and put in your pie. Very good. And then have some ice cream with that too. Sorry.
Or low-fat yogurt. Or frozen yogurt, right?
No, ice cream is better.
All food fit, right?
Yeah.
Well, wow, that sounds really versatile. And, for anybody who's trying to grow more food in your own backyard here in Florida, it's just another one of those great choices that most people don't know about or don't really think about much.
Yeah, and Bill, there's a previous episode too with Lori Johnson, and she did a lot of sorrel, went through several sorrel recipes, including the tea. So I think there was a sorrel salad that she did. So be sure to go back in our seasons and check that out. Sorry, Norma, Dr. Norma.
Well, no worries. What I'd like to add to is that myself and Matt and a few others who collaborated with us on the research project, we're going to have some EDIS fact sheets coming out soon. We're finalizing those. And so we'll have one on general production of sorrel, because we realize that, there's no information on commercial production. So that will be for those who want to grow commercially and also for the hobbyists. We also have a great fact sheet that we have drafted on the botany of sorrel, so that you can see, the different plant parts. So when we refer to the parts in the documents that we produce, you'll be able to get a better understanding of that. And then we'll have a publication on insects and nuisance pests and one on diseases. And so you also did that we struggle with rabbits. And, I live in an area that was once wooded. And so as you're losing that natural area, the rabbits seem to find my yard. The rabbits seem to find my yard. And so that is the big problem we have, is rabbits and getting them established. Then after the crop is producing, Squirrels are a big problem if you have trees. So I don't have any trees around, I don't have any large trees. So squirrels aren't a problem for me, but I've seen at the extension office in Marion when I used to work there, we had that issue with squirrels. And then when we were doing our research project, we had one of the farms was in a low-lying area, and that first summer it rained every day. And so our plants were underwater sometimes for extended periods. So we had a triple whammy of disease problems. We had fusarium wilt, we had southern blight, and we had Phytophthora. So those were all, problematic. So if you're growing sorrel and you know that you have an area that you typically have those disease problems, that might not be the best area to plant, because those diseases affect many different species of plants. So find an area that is not, you haven't had a major problem with fusarium or southern blight or Phytophthora. And then we came across a new disease called Cornelia, and that particular disease, it didn't have any record of existing in Florida, or in the US, I should say. So we're gonna have information on that. Now, because there's no pesticides registered for use on sorrel, we can't recommend anything except maybe your soaps or oils. So your cultural practices are going to be important. The farms that we worked with, they didn't apply any fertilizers at all. They just applied compost to the bed before planting, and that was it. Yeah. But it's a great.
I think you have an easy pest management. It's called Squish.
Yes.
Mechanical control.
Yes.
Oh, Norma, can you grow sorrel like in a bucket or in like a big container?
You certainly can. And so for some of our, viewers, they may have just a back porch or a very small space. And so you can grow in a 5-gallon bucket, for example. Just make sure you have holes for drainage, and you'll need full sun, so 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Now, in terms of when you plant your sorrel, you can get your sorrel in the ground as early as April and up to, mid-July, and still get production. The earlier you plant, the larger your plants are going to be. So if you don't have a lot of space, then you'll probably want to plant June, early July, so that way your plants don't get that big.
Yeah, a little word of advice for anybody watching who lives in a subdivision or homeowners association. You might think like, oh, well, I'm not allowed to grow anything that I can eat because I'm going to get a letter from the association. This is one of those things that, hibiscus is normally grown as an ornamental plant in people's front yards and their flower beds. So why don't you just substitute an edible variety for one that you really can't eat? And these get very, very pretty flowers. There's a very, very dark red hibiscus type flower. And I mean, you don't have to plow up your whole front yard and grow corn to get something edible out of your property. You can start with something like this. Lemongrass is a really good substitute for ornamental or decorative grasses that might be in your front yard that you can't eat. So, try thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, if you recall in the video that you see the plants at the front of the house, I had those in a flower bed, but those that were a hedge, it was what we call minimum tillage. we just dug the holes in the yard, in the lawn, and planted. So there wasn't a lot of disturbance of the soil. So to your example of plants that you can sneak in your landscape without, without having a problem, I like to also add to that list eggplants and bell peppers. Those are ones that you can integrate well into your landscape.
They can be attractive. They don't take up much space. Something that you can kind of tuck and sneak up in your flower beds, and most people probably wouldn't even really notice them. I know that some
How long
people.
do the blooms last? How long do the blooms last?
Oh, the blooms on the sorrel?
Yeah.
So they open in the morning, and by midday they close. They last a few days. I don't know exactly how many, but then they fall off. But they close around midday. So you're seeing the beauty in the morning.
Great way to start the day.
Yes.
And I've
As you
had them
sip
grow.
your floral tea. Sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
No, you're good. I've had them grow in the landscape, and just before I can even get out to harvest any of the fruit, they've gone to bloom. That's my part, just not paying attention. But I have a big pollinator garden in my yard, and so the pollinators will go to those flowers too. So I used to tell my kids, like, hey, if we don't get fruit for ourselves, we're at least providing the flowers for our pollinator friends. So, and it'll produce more fruit. So, but one of my big problems with one of my sorrel plants, I must have planted it in the wrong spot of my landscape where the structure was, because it just kept getting hit with the right amount of wind every day that it would fall over, and I was constantly propping that up more than my tomato plants. But it just must have been the location of where I had it, because the other ones, I didn't really have that problem. So
what I would say is that the sorrel plants are very resilient, and as they begin to fruit, sometimes they get so top heavy that they will break. The stem will break, and you can see the visible split in the stem, but it will continue to produce. So when that happens, don't worry about it, Jeremy. The plant will be fine. It will continue producing.
Yeah, that's the horticulturalist in me. When I see that happen, it's like,
Okay, we want to move on to kind of the next topic for today. Since Jeremy was able to pop back on here and join us, Jeremy's going to talk a little bit about growing hydroponically. So some things that you can do at home, some really, really simple systems, and some of the different ideas that you can have for growing hydroponically. I'm just going to let Jeremy go ahead and explain this. I'll go ahead and turn all of us off, and I'll go ahead and start your PowerPoint. Just tell me when you want me to go to the next slide. And remember, these are 2 parts, so you have to give me.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Between part A and B there.
No problem. I wanted to make sure there's more than enough information here, because I know there tends to be a lot of questions with hydroponics, especially if it's something new to everyone. So as Bill said, I'm Jeremy Rhoden. I'm the horticulture agent in Marion County, and hydroponic gardening is one of my passions. I absolutely love it. I've been doing it for over a decade now. All sorts of different systems, from commercial systems to homegrown systems. And I can tell you, even though I certainly believe it is a skill that everyone should know in terms of planting traditionally in the ground and in a raised bed, growing hydroponically is a game changer. And I feel like it saves you so much time and money. You get crops faster. There's just many benefits to it. And we'll kind of talk about those today. So Bill, you can go ahead and to the next slide. So first off, what are hydroponics? Hydroponic is just growing plants, primarily crops, basically in a soilless media. And there's different types of hydroponic medias that you can use, and I have those listed here, some of which you may be familiar with, like perlite, which is found in your bags of soil. It looks like little white styrofoam balls. It is a media that's commonly put into soils that help with water retention, but it also provides aeration, actually, of the soil. Rice hulls and coconut coir are originally waste products that would just go to landfills and be wasted, but we found that they work really well as a hydroponic media. So rice hulls are the shells in which every grain of rice grows in. And coconut coir, or cocoa fiber, is the husk of a coconut. So again, originally that was just a waste product, but they have been found to work very phenomenally for hydroponics and growing hydroponic. In fact, some of these components are even mixed into soil blends because of how well they work with either water retention or aeration. Steel wool, also called rock wool, is a very popular, common one in the industry. It is one of the most expensive ones. Likewise with expanded clay pellets. These are like little clay balls that you probably have seen with hydroponic systems that they put in netted cups. And then there's a couple other composted pine bark and sand. Now, the key with hydroponic medias is that not only are they soilless, but they also are completely nutrientless. And so the idea with hydroponics is that you are providing plants with their full nutrition during their irrigation cycle. So whether that is plants that are submerged in a liquid or roots that are submerged in a liquid 24 hours a day, or maybe they're getting irrigated 2 to 3 times a day or more with an irrigation line that has a charged nutrient solution running through it as well. So that's the key. So most of the time, these medias are primarily used for the foundation to hold the plant in place, but also to provide that environment where it is holding moisture and nutrients, very similar to soil. The only difference is it naturally does not have nutrients there, and it also does not naturally, or does not have water. You have to provide all of those things to it. So now in the case of composted pine bark, as it breaks down, it can become organic matter, which would increase its nutrient content. At that point, it can no longer be used as a hydroponic media. It can certainly be used out in a raised bed or out in the garden, but you can find composted pine bark that is basically like the silt at the bottom of the pile, and it has no nutrient value to it whatsoever, and it generally works really great as a hydroponic media. And when I say the bottom of the pile, I mean the bottom of a mulch pile. So if you were to go to a mulch lot, I've been to them before and said, I want everything at the bottom of that pile. And so as they sell out their mulch, they will give that to us. And we've used that before. And you're going to see photos in this presentation of where that's used as a media. One thing about sand is it is a soil component. If you think about what makes up soil, it's made of 3 different types of particles: sand, silt, and clay. But play sand has actually been processed to where it has no nutrient value at all, and it actually holds water pretty well. So you can't just use any sand. You can't use the Florida sand that you find out in your backyard, but play sand specifically works very well as a hydroponic media, and it actually does have water holding capacity, and it's been sterilized and has no nutrient value. So in this case, I should update this slide to say play sand, but it does work very well as a hydroponic media. You can proceed, Bill. So why would we want to do hydroponics? There's a whole list. I actually have 2 slides of different reasons, but you can skim through this and take a look. But primarily, some of my favorite options is there's really no weeding or herbicides involved. And then there's a reduction of pesticides that are needed. So if you look at the photo on the right, this was at a public school in Marion County that I used to work at. We would grow 200 heads of lettuce just like that every single week and harvest those and put them in our school cafeteria. So we would start by seed and we'd grow those out in a tray. 4 weeks later, we would transplant the seedlings into our hydroponic towers. And then 4 weeks later, we would harvest them. So it was an 8-week total turnaround time. And we had that on a schedule to where we were harvesting 200 heads every week. That schedule now is consistent in all 7 of our high schools and 11 middle schools in Marion County. So they're growing all sorts of lettuce as well as many other crops at our school. So we have 52 schools in Marion County, and they're all growing hydroponically as part of our Farm to School Fitness and Nutrition in Schools program here. So there is a reduction of pesticides. So with this lettuce and everything we grew, we never would spray it at all. Like we would go years without ever spraying it because it's growing so fast. So as I said, from seed to finish, it does that in 8 weeks, whereas in the ground, it's going to take approximately 3 months to grow the same variety of lettuce. And that's because in the ground, your plant roots are having to use their energy to grow out further to look for nutrients that they need in order to survive, their 17 elements or their 17 nutrients. Whereas with hydroponics, you're providing all 17 nutrients to them 24 hours a day at all times, whether that's a irrigation system that waters every once in a while, or if it's running 24/7. So in the water, in most cases, or the nutrient solution is recirculating. We'll talk about that shortly. But you can see there's many different reasons here. They can also be grown in any location and pretty much throughout any part of the year. They take up a lot less space. One of these towers we would grow 25 heads of lettuce in the amount of space it takes to grow 1 head of lettuce in the ground. So we're grown vertically as opposed to horizontally. So we can go to the next slide. And just a couple other things, you're reducing agricultural runoff because a lot of these systems are closed, which means they're recirculating the water and the nutrients. They're very simple to master. You're going to get crops significantly faster. In fact, they say it's about 3 times faster than growing in the ground. And you're also using about 75% less nutrients and water as what you use in traditional gardening. So in terms of saving money and also saving resources, and as land is continuously becoming less and less available, I see this as a great option for providing to our needs in the future. The last point on there that it mentions is we can increase our ability to grow crops for specific characteristics. So one of the things that we have found in hydroponics, because we are controlling 100% of what the crops are getting, we can adjust their nutrient content in every angle. And so one of the things we've been able to do is we've been able to adjust the nutrients we are providing to crops, which in turn allows them to change the type of nutrition that they are providing to the consumer. So for example, in Japan right now, they're growing heads of lettuce where they have adjusted the nutrient that they're giving to the plant. And in return, it has adjusted the nutrient content in which it provides to the consumer. So in this case, they're using lettuce that has a lower sugar content in it, which is better for diabetics. And it's a healthy crop where they're getting their nutrition. And we have researchers even here in South Florida and with IFAS that are doing similar trials on making lettuce more nutritious. So not just having to go to romaine lettuce, which is generally our most nutritious lettuce, but now they're finding new varieties and creating new varieties of lettuce, and also using varieties that already exist, but just altering the nutrition content of what they're giving to the lettuce to make it have a higher nutrition value for people who are consuming it. So another great thing about hydroponics. We can move to the next slide. So as I mentioned, there's 2 general types of hydroponics. There's open systems, which means that it does not recirculate. And so with these towers on the right, you can see kind of how we have this set up as we have a catch bucket in the bottom of the towers. So every one of those white pots on the tower has drain holes, and they're irrigated from the top with a charged nutrient line. And basically what we do is we aim for 10% leachate to ensure every one of those white pots have been fully saturated, so all the plants have the nutrition they need. And so what we do is we set a timer and we run our irrigation timer, and we check to see whenever we start seeing irrigation drip from the bottom white pot, and then we pause our stopwatch and we add 10 seconds to that, and that's how we aim for 10% leachate. That 10% leachate is then captured inside the bottom bucket, which is full of a hydroponic media, and we plant crops down there. So in this case, you can see little grasses down there. That's chives that have recently been cut back, and we would cut these back every 2 weeks. Whether we needed chives for cooking or not, we would just cut them back every 2 weeks, just like grass, and they would completely fill that entire bucket full of chives, and they would catch all the leachate so nothing is running off. So it's a really great system, but that's pretty much the idea of open systems. You're having something capture the leachate as opposed to it recirculating. And so this is really good in the sense of your nutrient and your pH values stay consistent, which can be a problem in hydroponics with recirculating if you don't have the proper equipment to check those things. All right. And then the next system is a closed system. And this is, as I mentioned, is where everything is recirculating. This is good in the sense of recycling a lot of your water and nutrients. But the only caveat to this is you have to be able to test your nutrient solution on a regular basis, because as your nutrient solution is being fed to the plants, it's going to absorb nutrients from that, and your nutrient levels are going to change as well as your pH. So you have to regularly be checking for these things. All right. All right, so these are kind of the main types of hydroponics. So we have Cracky wicking system, and they're listed in easiest to learn to most difficult. Cracky wicking system is named that based on Dr. Cracky from the University of Hawaii, who came up with the concept. And you're going to see pictures of this. Deep water culture of floating, media beds, vertical gardens, top drip systems, and nutrient film techniques. The ones in red are the ones that are open systems, so therefore they do not recirculate. The ones in black are generally recirculating systems. And some of these systems can be a combination of multiple things. For example, media beds can also have top drip systems where they're irrigated from above. And you're going to see photos of that here. All right, so this is the first method, cracky, and this is basically where there's no electric or running water. You just fill this tub with a nutrient solution, and you have a stationary lid that stays in place. And you set your seedlings into those netted cups that are on that stationary lid, as you can kind of see over in the photo on the right. And then you just let them sit there for 4 weeks, or however long your plant takes, 4 to 6 weeks if it's a larger crop. The thing with this is you are using simpler crops. So we're talking lettuce, herbs, spinach, and you can do this indoors or outdoors. I have a master gardener who rotates these bins every week. She has 4 growing at all times, and every week she harvests 4 heads of lettuce for herself. You can grow these indoor or outdoor. Indoors is where she grows them under grow lights on a wire shelf, and it works very well. If you do it outdoor, the big problem with this system outdoors is you have to be aware in Florida, our evaporation rate is much higher. And so evaporation does occur faster than those roots can grow to stay with the solution. And once those roots come out of that solution that's in the tub, let's say because evaporation has brought it all the way down, you can kill your plant within about an hour or 2. So an alternative to that, if you progress to the next slide, is the floating bed method. And in this method, you have a raft on top that's not stationary. So regardless of evaporation rate, it moves up and down with the system. And what's nice about this is you can make a floating bed system with any type of container you have. So in this case, we use 4x8 raised beds in a sheet of insulation, 2-inch insulation. And we basically drilled a hole with a hole saw every square foot. And this is our what we call lettuce rafts, where we're growing lettuce. And you can see those beautiful root systems in there. Again, it's a set it and forget it system. There's no running water, no electric. It's just a system that works really well. You can put this out in the middle of the field and it works really well. The idea is you just fill it up with water initially with your nutrient solution mixed in there. And then you just set your raft on there and you set your seedlings in there. And speaking of seedlings, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but pretty much everything with hydroponics, we start by seedling, not by seed. So there are a few things you can start by seed, but for the most part, we are growing out seedlings in a separate tray and then transplanting those into a hydroponic system and finishing them out hydroponically. The exception to that is like nasturtiums and basils, and there's a couple other herbs that would work, but for the most part, everything is transplanted by seedling. And then the picture on the far right is just little horse feeding tubs that we use to create small scale float beds. But we've done this with all sorts of things, including 5-gallon buckets that work really effectively. And then the next one here are media beds. Media bed can be anything. This can be a raised bed. It can be a flower pot, anything you have that's full of a hydroponic media. So that means it's nutrientless and soilless. And then you just plant your crops in there and you provide some type of irrigation to it with charged lines. So in this case, in the photos on the left, we dug trenches out that were about 18 to 20 inches deep and lined it with landscape fabric. And it is full with composted pine bark with no nutrient value. And then we've planted plants in there, and you can't really see it, but in between those plants, there are 2 rows of drip tape. And those rows of drip tape are connected to injector system that supplies them with nutrients. Now, if you want to do something more small scale at home, the photo on the far right are Lowe's versions of earth boxes. I think they call them patio plickers. Also, Home Depot has these. I think Ace Hardware as well. And basically, it's full of a hydroponic media, and we planted different types of vegetables and herbs in these. And with every little drain spout on these, which are generally in the corner, we just put a little irrigation emitter in there, which connects back to that gray tank in the back that's full of a hydroponic solution and a little pond pump. So this was something you could do on your own. You can even just have one of these boxes, and you can make this whole system, for all of like $30 and grow your plants hydroponically this way. Next one are vertical towers. There's all sorts of different vertical hydroponic towers out there. I briefly already talked about Vertigrow, which you see there on the left and also on the far right. The reason I have the one on the far right there, this is an edible flowers greenhouse that we were in, and they converted the Vertigrow tower to be a closed system. So generally it is open where everything is draining into a leachate pot. In this case, they have everything draining down into a pot that has a spout that connects to a PVC pipe, where everything drains to a reservoir and is then tested every 15 minutes in altered nutrition or altered pH based on the needs of the solution mix. The photo you see in the center are another system. I believe it's called Grow Tower, if I recall. And it's more of an aeroponic system. So the roots hang in the air in the middle of those white tubes that the plants are growing in. So you can kind of see that the third tower back, there's a big, really thick white tube. The plants hang in the side of that tube, and their root systems just hang emerged in the air. And then every few minutes, there's a hose in there that sprays all the roots with a nutrient charged solution, and any excess drips off the roots into the reservoir at the bottom. So this is a technique called aeroponics, which is a form of hydroponics, but it's where your root systems are growing in the air, hence the name aero. And so it's another type of growing tower system. And then you move the next one. So this is top drip. So as you saw, even the hydroponic towers in many cases, like the vertigo towers, have a top drip on top of those, even though they're also considered a vertigo tower or a vertical tower. This system on the far left is basically like a raised bed tabletop system that's made as a hydroponic system. These little black pots have spouts in the bottom that drain into the white PVC pipe, which then drain into the container below. So this is a closed system. So each individual pot has an emitter on top that irrigates it with a nutrient solution. And like I said, any excess drains out of the bottom. These pots are removable also. So if you need more space or you're growing a bigger plant, the pots pop out of the system. And so it's very easy to use. The photo in the middle and then the two photos on the right are of a Beto bucket or a Dutch bucket hydroponic system. And this is a type of system primarily used in industry for growing large scale crops, pretty much mainly vining crops, but you can grow large crops like squash, zucchini. We've done cucumbers, which is a vining one, but we've done cauliflower, broccoli, all sorts of things in these buckets, and they work very, very well. And the idea with these buckets is they have a reservoir built into the bottom, which you can kind of see there in the bottom right-hand picture. And then there's a spout where if the water level gets to a certain level, it drains out into a pipe on the ground where it goes back to a nutrient reservoir. So this is a recirculating closed system. And you can see some pictures of tomato vining crops that were growing before with this type of system. All right, and then the last system is probably the most advanced system. Unfortunately, when you look up online DIY hydroponic, most of the time this is the type of system that they are advertising people to make, where you see photos, and they're generally using like a 4-inch PVC pipe. They drill out a hole, they put netted cups in there. It is a great system. The problem with this system is that there's no room for failure. And that is because when plant roots are submerged in a liquid solution or dependent on a liquid solution at all times, and there's no media surrounding them, then that solution has to be present at all time. And so in the case of this system, these channels have an irrigation line at the top that run 24 hours a day. So the roots that are sitting inside these channels are sitting in a liquid solution at all times. And if anything happens, let's say those emitters clog or your power goes out and the pump goes down or your nutrient reservoir somehow runs out of liquid, you have 1 hour to save your crop. It will be completely wilted. And you can revive it and bring up the wilt. But even if it looks beautiful, if it went more than an hour, by the time you harvest that crop and you taste it, it's going to be very bitter because of the process that it went through. So it is a little touchy in terms of, there's not a lot of room for failure. If the electric goes out with a media bed or your towers, for example, the vertigo towers, you don't have to worry about that because the plants are already sitting in a saturated or moist media, which will stay that way generally for about 2 to 3 days. So you have some flexibility with some time to keep them alive. But in something like this, where it's consistently dependent on a running flow of water, once that flow of water is stopped, you only have an hour to save the crop. All right. And then, so that was the last system. So I know we're getting short on time, but so let me know, Bill, when I need to stop. But just to kind of touch up a little bit, the difference between soil and hydroponics. With soil, your plant nutrients are found naturally scattered throughout the soil in multiple forms. So your plants are generally finding those. In fact, when you apply a regular fertilizer that you can buy from any garden center, such as like Miracle Grow, Osmocote, things like that, most of the time those fertilizers are only coming with macronutrients, maybe some micronutrients in there, but they're not coming with all 17 nutrients. So, and that's because many of those micronutrients can be found naturally in the soil. But all soils are different, and they can have different excesses of nutrients or deficiencies of nutrients. And then also, as I mentioned about the general all-purpose fertilizers, they're not going to work for hydroponics. With hydroponics, all nutrients must be provided to the crop at all times. So therefore, if you're growing hydroponically, you need to buy a hydroponic fertilizer, not just go to the store and find something at Lowe's or Home Depot or Ace Hardware, but use a hydroponic fertilizer. And you can find those all over online, on Amazon. There are so many options, different brands out there, and I have found a lot that work very well. The nutrients, again, availability is consistent, so your growth occurs much faster. They're not having to put a lot of time or effort into growing their roots out. Instead, they put it into growing the foliage or the fruit, so you get your crops a lot faster. All right, and as I mentioned with nutrition, there are certain fertilizers you can buy for different stages of life of your plant, or if you're growing specifically certain types of fruit, like with your advanced crops like tomatoes and peppers, you can actually buy hydroponic fertilizers specifically for those. And this has actually worked really well in industry for large scale farms that are grown hydroponically. They have been able to save a lot of money on the amount of nutrients they buy based on the rate of how much they are providing and the type of nutrients they are providing to their plant, based on whether they're flowering or whether it's their time of fruiting, things of that nature. But the key with any type of nutrition you're using is following the label. The photo you see here on the right is an all-purpose fertilizer that tends to work for pretty much everything, including those peppers and tomatoes. And this is just one brand. So MaxiGrow is one that we've used. There's another one called Dino. Vertigrow has a lot of different ones that are general ones like this, and they're really great products. All right, so I'm going to just skim through this part really fast, but if you are interested in building your own float bed, I will send Bill and Wendy the instructions I have an instructional sheet for how you can do this yourself. It's very simple, but I'll kind of just go through this so you can do this. All right, so first, the items you'll need: your container of choice, a jigsaw with a long blade. And I'm going to show photos of this: a drill, hole saw bit, your netted cups, 2-inch thick styrofoam, permanent marker, and your hydroponic fertilizer of choice. All right, so basically when you go to make your bed, I like to use a 2-inch sheet of insulation. So if you go to a hardware store, they generally sell these by 4x8. And so I've used these and I can get 32 buckets, or around 32, 35 5-gallon buckets from one sheet if I'm doing that. I've also used kiddie pools like this. I've used wooden 4x8 beds, and they work really well. But the idea is when you go to cut that styrofoam, you want to base it on the bottom diameter of your container, because many containers kind of go down like this. And if you go based on the top of your container, as that raft goes down, it's likely to get snug, which will take your roots out of the water, which will end up causing your plant to wilt or die within that hour. So you don't want that to happen. This is a picture here of the jigsaw that I use. I trace out my container. So in this case, I was making 5-gallon bucket kits for a class I did, and I used the jigsaw to cut around that and cut that out. The hole saw is the little piece here you see on the drill. It basically is operated by the drill. Now, the key with this, if you're using a 2-inch sheet of insulation, you need a netted cup that's going to go just below the 2-inch. So the idea isn't that the netted cup goes all the way through the styrofoam. You only want about 1 centimeter of the netted cup to actually be in your liquid solution. So what's nice with this 2-inch sheet of insulation, you can stick that 3-inch netted cup in there, and it allows just about 1 centimeter or 2 of that netted cup to be in the water solution. And the reason you want that is because one of the misconceptions with hydroponics is people think the entire root system is submerged under a solution if you're growing with a solution method. And that's not the case. That will drown out your plant. You have to have some oxygenated roots. So some of those plants need access to oxygen. So by doing this method, it works. Now, the key with this is if you're using, let's say, a 3-inch cup for this, you're going to base your hole saw size based on the bottom of your netted cup. So a 3-inch netted cup, even though it measures 3-inch at the top, at the bottom, it's only going to measure 2.5-inch because it kind of goes down like this, kind of like a standard solo cup. It does the same thing. So you're going to use a hole saw based on that bottom diameter. All right, and there's a picture there of how you can see how the cups sit in the styrofoam to be just about 1 centimeter or so below. And you can see in the background of this picture, I'm using one of those really nice heavy duty whiskey barrels that you can buy at garden centers that has a plugged hole. And I'm using that as a floating garden bed in a garden because I wanted something that looked a little more decorative as opposed to a 5-gallon bucket. In both of these systems, we got a lot of lettuce. So you're going to basically fill up your system or your container with water. You want to be aware of how many gallons you are using of water. You also want to make sure the system or the container is a strong container. If it's something that's likely to buckle or bust with that solution in there, then that's not a good container for you to use. And it's going to need to be something where it gets a thorough amount of sunlight. So you want to make sure it's something strong. A lot of 5-gallon buckets that you can buy at hardware stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. I know they are generally considered food grade, at least according to their website, because that is a question we get on whether or not they should be food grade or not. There's not a ton of research that's into that, but I try to use food grade, and I know that those are food grade. Once you get your water filled in your container based on how many gallons, most of the fertilizers I've used recommend using basically 1 tablespoon per gallon. And so that works really nice. And then you just thoroughly mix that until the fertilizer is completely dissolved. And then you put your floating raft on the water, and then you just plop in your seedlings and go from there. So once you plop in your seedlings, you wait 4 to 5 weeks, depending on what you're growing. Most crops, I would say 4 to 6 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks at most, if you're doing something like an advanced crop, like eggplant, tomatoes, things like that, which aren't necessarily recommended for float bed systems, but you can do that. And you just wait, and it's a set it and forget it system. You wait, you can see what it looks like when I have the seedlings sitting in there. I mentioned earlier, one of the medias you can buy are those little clay balls. People will buy those just to fill them in around these netted cups. And it's one of the most expensive hydroponic medias, right there with rock wool. And the only thing it is really good for is it does hold some moisture retention, and then it props up your plant, and that's about it. And so I've gone over 10 years now in hydroponics and never used clay pellets for anything. I set my seedling in the cup just like this. After about 2 or 3 days, it establishes pretty well. It might, fall over 1 or 2 times, and I just straighten it back up, but then they grow out completely full. And if you look on the next slide, you can see here, this is after, in this particular case, we've grown romaine. 3 weeks later, we had 3 full heads of romaine lettuce. You can see those nice, beautiful white root systems on there as well. All right, and I think that's about it. So any questions? I'm happy to answer any.
If anybody watching us live has any questions, you just go ahead and put them in the chat or in the comments, and I can read them, and I'll show them on the screen, and we'll have whoever you're asking answer the questions. But Jeremy, that's great. Can you send me the directions for doing the 5-gallon bucket one?
Yeah, absolutely.
5-gallon buckets. I want to do that this winter in my backyard.
I've tried.
I'm still inspired. Sorry, go ahead. No.
I've tried the 5-gallon bucket system. It's very, very easy. I'm a lazy gardener, so anything that's simple is good for me. What I would ask you, Jeremy, is what type of lettuce would you recommend in terms of varieties? Because the one that I tried, it wasn't very sturdy in terms of the variety. So the leaves were very flimsy. Mm-hmm. I like my lettuce leaves a little bit more sturdy. So what varieties would you recommend on the leaf lettuce?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've used all sorts of lettuce varieties. In fact, I think if that may have been the lettuce ones that we had given you. We ordered a pack of, I believe the variety was called Red Sails. And then there's another one, a type of leafy green that was very similar to it, but it was a green variety. And what we learned by growing those is that they were very paper-like in terms of we found they were very flimsy for sure. But the ones I've had the most success with in terms of the sturdiness and that grow very well in this method are pretty much any type of romaine. Bib lettuces do very well. If you are familiar with, there's different hydroponic seed companies or just seed companies in general, but a type that grows very well in Florida is a variety called Salanovas. And those can be found with Johnny seeds. And then there's also one, Paramount Seeds have their own kind of varieties that are lettuce varieties that do really well hydroponically and also grow well in hot climates such as Florida. But pretty much all the Salanova varieties, we've tried every one of them growing this way. They grow beautifully. And you will see with those, they have different flavors. One in particular, there's an oak leaf lettuce, Salanova lettuce, that is really good, and it has a really cool shape to the leaves. It's great if you're trying to make a blended salad or use something of that nature. And then there's also another one I want to say is called Sweet Crisp, if I remember. And that one has more of a bitter taste. Kind of remind me of you talking about the leaves earlier. Not so tart, but I mean, like in this case, it's like a bitterness. And some people do like that in blending it in with the salad because it provides different flavors within the salad. And so we grew those with the schools and would harvest them for our salad bars at the schools. So
Have you ever tried growing things like Swiss chard, kale, other leafy greens?
Yep. So there's many leafy greens that will do well in a float system. The big thing is anything that gets really large or large stalk. So for example, if you're doing something like broccoli, because you can eat the broccoli greens as well, that's going to have a really large stalk. It can eventually cause problems with your raft. It can break your raft. It can get really big. With float beds, generally it's meant for simple crops, but you can turn it into what's called deep water culture by adding in an aeration pump. And so what that does is there's some advanced crops like tomatoes and peppers, basically crops that are fruiting that need more oxygen to the roots. And by adding in an air stone with a pump inside your reservoir or whatever your floating reservoir is that you're using for your container, that can help you grow those things. But the big thing is you have to be mindful of the weight that it's going to put on the raft and make sure your raft is sturdy enough. The IFAS Center up in Swanee Valley, they have a whole hydroponic unit up there where they do a lot of research on hydroponics, and they have always recommended doing nothing more than generic leafy greens in a floating bed system just because of those issues. But I do know a teacher here in Marion County who likes to test the waters a little bit, and they were at the end of the school year and had a whole row of vertigrow towers full of different types of peppers, bell peppers, Cubanelle peppers, all sorts of things that were just doing so well. And he could not see cleaning that out at the end of the school year. So he was like, you know what? I'm just pulling them all out, rinsing the roots off, and I'm going to plop them into my floating bed and just let them live there. Well, I kid you, he had 4 different float beds. He filled all of them up with peppers, and throughout the entire season, the whole summer, had tons. And I mean, he, out of that 2 or 3 months of summer, I got 3 bags full of a variety of peppers from him because they just continuously kept producing. And so even though it's not necessarily something that might be recommended, I always encourage people to go and experiment. Everything about horticulture and gardening is all about trial by error. So just go see. You're probably going to see why they don't necessarily recommend it, but you also might find some pros or some cons in doing it. And so in his case, now he does that every year. He moves his peppers out and puts them over there. And you know, any students who are around during the summer, or parents or faculty and staff, he'll give those out. And that's always a great thing that makes people happy. So.
Yeah, I know we tell people it's very, very difficult to grow peppers during the heat of summer here. But I know University of Florida has done research on growing them under shade cloth. And if you get the right shade cloth, you can grow peppers all summer long. We did that at our Master Gardener nursery one year. Oh my gosh, we had like a little hoop house just stuffed full of hot peppers.
Oh yeah, and that brings up a good point. So his float beds are actually, they're 4x8 float beds that he made, and they're originally on the ground. He elevated them on top of greenhouse tables, and they are under a shade structure with 40% aluminate shade cloth. So that's a good point. But that does bring up another thing I want to mention. So I talked about the floating bed systems. We had one year at the end of the school year, we had close to 500 seedlings left, 500 lettuce seedlings. And so what we did, we had about 3,000 square feet of raised bed space. And then we also had 9 of those 4x8 floating beds. And so I just told my students, we were near the end of the summer, I said, put one in every netted cup of the float beds, you know, and then also whatever's left, plant them out in the raised bed. And so throughout the summer, I was at the schools working and maintaining the greenhouses and the gardens. And one day I was out there, it was around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I walked to the back of the greenhouse where we had all these float beds. And this was outside the greenhouse, not inside the greenhouse. So just out in the open. And I had forgotten we put the lettuce in there. Well, all the lettuce were at full size, ready to harvest in all 9 of our floating beds. And they were beautiful. And this is middle of summer, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All the lettuce in the raised beds, just, 20 to 30 feet away, every single one of those heads of lettuce had bolted. So they had gone to flower. They looked absolutely horrible. And I was like, how in the world is that happening? So I went and I stuck my hand down into the solution, and it felt like spring water. And so I started talking with the folks up at IFAS Swanee Valley who grow, the whole hydroponics up there. And one of the things that they have found is with their systems, they're now using refrigeration systems, like what you have on water fountains, and it will pump up solution out of the reservoir, refrigerate it, put it back into the reservoir. And what they have found is they're able to grow leafy greens over the summer in Florida by providing them with a colder solution, and they don't tend to bolt, and their flavor is still good. And so that is the only thing I can think of with this. Now, with the bucket system, it doesn't work as well because unlike the wooden framed beds that have a much thicker insulation to that water, in a bucket system, trying to grow those over the summer, you can stick your hand in the solution and it is, warmer. So summertime is still not ideal, but I've done it at my own house with a smaller version of the 4x8 raised bed system, and it does work really well growing lettuce over the summer. And my only thought to that, again, it's not research based, it's just kind of what I have seen, is I think it has to do with the solution staying nice and cool, and it's well insulated with that top styrofoam cover as well.
Wow, lots of options, but I think it's just about time to wrap it up here. So for anybody watching who'd like to get in touch with me, there's my email. That is by far the best way to get in touch with me. If you have any more questions about sorrel, you can go ahead and get in touch with Norma. There is her email address also. And I didn't want to leave Wendy out. If anybody has any questions for Wendy, just go ahead and send her an email. And if you give me just a second here, I will go ahead and share in the comments the link to next week's. And there we go. So please be sure to join us next week for another edition of Food Systems in Season. And we're going to have Dr. Stacy Strickland here with us. He's from Osceola County Extension, and he's going to talk about what you can do if you have 5 acres. So we have a lot of people that moved to Florida and they have an acre, 5 acres, 10 acres. They're wondering, what can I do? Can I have horses? Can I have goats? Can I start a farm? And Stacy's going to tell you everything that you can do with 5 acres. And I'm going to tell you what you could do with only 5 square feet. Well, it's a little bit bigger than that. But if you live in an apartment, if you live in a subdivision, you have a very small yard, you don't want to spend a lot of time, energy, space, you might be a little bit limited, in physical ability, digging a huge garden. What can you do to help produce more food for yourself in just 5 square feet? So please be sure to join us again next week. Norma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Glad I could be here.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.